At the stroke of midnight, while my sister was screaming and my mother collapsed onto the limestone floor, I was hundreds of miles away, calmly sipping champagne. For a decade, my family called me a failure who plays with mud for a living, all while they were busy signing secret papers to steal my $40 million inheritance. They expected a handmade vase for New Year's Eve, a pathetic peace offering. Instead, they got a walnut crate that turned their real estate empire into a federal criminal case. If you want to know how one delivery destroyed a dynasty, stay with me until the very end. As the clock struck midnight, my sister's scream shattered the rhythm of the live jazz and the bright chime of crystal. My mother collapsed onto the limestone floor with a heavy, hollow thud. My father stood paralyzed, his face as drained of color as the bleached plains of West Texas. Only minutes before, he had been roaring into his phone, demanding to know where I was. I had answered him with a voice like still water, asking if the family had enjoyed my final contribution to the evening. My name is Clara Sterling. I am 28 years old, and I own a boutique ceramic studio in Austin. To the Sterlings of the Hill Country, the most formidable land development dynasty in the state, I have always been the failure who plays with mud for a living. They spent a decade reminding me that I would never measure up to my brother, the rising executive, or my effortlessly perfect sister. What they didn't realize was that for 3 years, I had been silently tracking every cent they tried to funnel away from my reach. A single crate, delivered at exactly 11:30 on New Year's Eve, changed the trajectory of our lives forever. It all truly began 10 days earlier, when I decided to return to the family estate to help with the most lavish gala the county had ever seen. I went there thinking that, perhaps, this year might finally be different. 10 days before the ball, my mother's message was still sitting on my screen, unread. Come home early, Clara. This party will be our most significant yet. Everyone from the valley to the coast will be here. I need you. It was the first time in years she had reached out with something bordering on a plea. I sat in my studio, surrounded by half-glazed vessels and the low hum of the kiln, wondering if this was her clumsy way of offering a truce. I packed a small bag, carefully wrapped a stoneware vase I'd been firing for my father, a piece with deep iron oxide washes that mimicked the canyon shadows, and drove toward the hills. The transition from the city's sprawl to the gated seclusion of the Sterling estate took nearly 2 hours. As the sun dipped low, turning the horizon into a bruised purple and gold, the house appeared like a monolith of glass and steel carved into the ridge. Even from the main gate, the scale of the preparations was staggering. Crews were stringing thousands of lights along the edge of the cliffside pool, a pyrotechnic scaffold was rising near the garden, and massive white marquees were being anchored to the lawn. It wasn't just a celebration, it was the Sterling family's annual performance of power, a gathering designed to draw in every investor and power broker that mattered. I parked my old truck near the sprawling garage, gripped my bag and the wrapped gift, and walked toward the entrance. The heavy oak doors swung open before I could reach for the handle. There stood Rosa, who had looked after the house for 15 years, her apron dusted with flour. Miss Clara, look at you. It has been far too long. She pulled me into a brief, warm embrace. Rosa had always been the quiet heart of that house, the one who would slip me a warm biscuit when my mother wasn't looking and ask genuine questions about my latest experiments with clay. Your mother is out on the terrace with the coordinators. Please come in. I stepped into the foyer. The air was thick with the scent of expensive cedar diffusers and something citrusy baking deep in the kitchen. The house had been redesigned again, new abstract landscapes on the walls, and a massive wrought iron chandelier that likely cost more than my studio's annual lease. The opulence hit me with its usual weight, a reminder that every square inch was built on calculated land deals and aggressive flips. I pushed the resentment down, focusing on the weight of the vase in my arms. I hoped that this time, my father might actually hold it and feel the craft in the clay. Rosa led me through the gallery, past floor-to-ceiling windows that framed the darkening hills. From the kitchen, I could hear the sharp commands of event planners debating ice sculptures and caviar service. Then my mother appeared from the shadows of the hallway, a clipboard in hand. Her blonde hair was a sharp, perfect bob, and she was dressed in crisp white linen, as if she were already posing for the society pages. "Clara, you've arrived." There was no hug. Instead, she gave me a swift, clinical look-over, scanning my worn jeans and linen shirt, as if she were calculating the market value of a distressed property. "The guest suites in the north wing are ready. Your old room is being gutted. We're converting it into a fitness center for the private trainers. We simply needed the utility." The words felt like a physical blow. That room had been mine for 18 years. I had painted those walls myself. I had kept my first clumsy high school pots on those shelves. Now, it was just utility. I swallowed the tightness in my throat and nodded. "Sounds practical, Mother. I brought something for Dad. I thought he might want to see it before the guests arrive." She barely glanced at the package. "He's in the library with Mark and the advisors finishing the year-end projections. Don't interrupt them unless it's brief." Her tone was strictly transactional, the same one she used with contractors. I turned toward the library, the stoneware vase feeling heavier with every step. The door was slightly ajar, a sliver of warm light spilling onto the rug, and the low murmur of voices drifted through the gap. I raised my hand to knock, but my father's voice stopped me cold. "Clara needs to accept reality. That little craft project of hers isn't bringing in more than a pittance. We are doing this for her own sake." I froze, my hand hovering in the air. Through the crack in the door, I could see them. My father, Arthur Sterling, leaning back in his leather chair, my mother, who had slipped in behind me, and my brother Mark, already the company's chief financial officer, tapping away at a tablet. Beside them sat a man in a sharp, unfamiliar suit, a financial strategist brought in to finalize the kill. "The timing is perfect," Mark said, swirling a glass of amber liquid. "New Year's Eve, the whole network is here. Dad gives the speech about legacy and unity, and then we pivot. We show her the numbers. Her little studio versus a real executive track at Sterling Holdings. We offer her an entry-level marketing spot, 6 figures, full benefits. She signs the relinquishment right there, in front of the family." My father nodded slowly. "Exactly. An intervention disguised as an opportunity. Eleanor, you handle the emotional side. Make it sound like we're saving her from herself." My mother leaned in, her voice softening into that practiced, predatory silkiness. "We'll tell her we've spent years watching her waste her education on hobbies, but that we're finally stepping in to put her back on the right path." The strategist cleared his throat, flipping a page in his ledger. "Legally, it's a clean break. Based on her current lack of assets, she's barely staying afloat. When she sees the corporate stability, she'll fold. And once the trust is restructured, moving the $40 million into the offshore vehicle by the end of the quarter, the core holdings will be protected from any future instability." Mark let out a short, sharp laugh. "You mean Clara's instability? We can't have her suing for a larger share of the estate when she finally realizes she's broke." My sister Grace, who had been quiet until then, joined in with a brittle laugh. "Honestly, remember last Christmas? She showed up in that thrift store wrap talking about her firing schedules, as if she were running a Fortune 500. If we don't do this now, she'll embarrass the name. The Miller girl just made partner, and our sister is selling bowls on the internet." My knees felt weak. I leaned against the cold stone of the hallway, clutching the vase to my chest. They weren't just dismissing my career, they were preparing to erase my identity. The relinquishment meant signing away any claim to the family trust, the one my father had always promised would be divided equally. And the offshore transfer was a calculated theft, hidden behind the guise of protection. "Once she signs, we move fast," my father's voice dropped to a low, final growl. "Rosa clears out the rest of that room that night. The tools, the sketches, all of it goes to storage or the bin. No more half measures. She either joins the firm, or she's on her own." The room fell silent, followed by the soft clink of glasses. Grace raised hers to new beginnings. Heat rushed to my face, a roar beginning to swell in my ears. $40 million. My entire inheritance was being funneled away because I chose to create rather than extract. The vase nearly slipped from my numb fingers, but I caught it just in time. The faint sound was enough to make a chair scrape inside the room. Panic flared. I couldn't face them yet, not while the truth was still burning me alive. I backed away, moving like a ghost, and slipped down the hall past the kitchen. My bag was still by the door. I grabbed it, eased the heavy oak entrance open, and stepped out into the biting chill of the night. I started the truck, the engine a low hum as I rolled down the long, gravel drive. No goodbyes, no scenes. Just the red glow of my taillights fading into the dark as I headed back toward the city. The wrapped gift sat on the passenger seat, a silent witness to a family that no longer existed. The guest suites in the north wing are ready, my mother said, her eyes already drifting back to her clipboard. Your old room is under renovation. We're turning it into a home gym. We needed the space for the trainers who'll be staying through the season. The words landed like gravel under tires. That room had been mine for 18 years. I had painted those walls a warm, dusty ochre myself. The shelves were still lined with my first lopsided mugs from high school pottery classes. Now it was just space. I swallowed the knot in my throat. Sounds practical, Mother. I brought something for Dad. I thought he'd like to see it before the chaos starts. She barely glanced at the wrapped package in my arms. He's in the library with Mark and the others finalizing the numbers for the toast. Don't interrupt unless it's quick. Her tone was strictly business, the same one she used on contractors who dared to underbid. I nodded and headed down the hall, the stoneware vase feeling like a lead weight now. The library door was ajar, a sliver of warm lamplight spilling onto the hardwood, and low voices carried through the crack. I raised my hand to knock, but my father's words stopped me cold. Clara needs to face reality, Arthur said. That mud hobby of hers isn't pulling in more than a pittance. We're doing this for her own good. My breath caught. I froze, my hand hovering, suddenly feeling the crushing weight of the clay. Through the gap I could see them. My father was leaning back in his leather chair, his silver hair catching the glow of the desk lamp. My mother was perched on the armrest, her clipboard finally forgotten. My brother Mark, 34 and already the firm's CFO, was tapping figures into a tablet. My sister Grace, the high-powered real estate attorney who closed every deal with a predatory smile, sat opposite a man in a crisp suit I didn't recognize, a strategist brought in from Dallas, his briefcase overflowing with spreadsheets. The timing is perfect, Mark said, his voice as smooth as the bourbon he swirled in his glass. New Year's Eve, a full house, the aunts, the uncles, the entire network. Dad gives the speech about family legacy. Then we pivot. We show her the projections. Her studio versus a real executive track at Sterling Holdings. A marketing position, 6-figure base, full benefits. She signs the relinquishment right there in front of everyone. My father nodded, steepling his fingers. Exactly. The intervention is scripted. Eleanor, you handle the emotional angle. Express concern for her future. Make it sound like tough love. My mother leaned in, her voice softening just enough to sell the lie. We'll say we've worried for years watching her waste that business degree on crafts, but that we're finally here to help her get back on track. The advisor cleared his throat, flipping a page. Financially, it's airtight. Based on her studio's tax filings and lack of visible assets, she's scraping by on $40,000 a year, tops. Compare that to corporate stability, and she'll see reason. The trust transfer of $40 million into the offshore vehicle by quarter's end protects the core holdings from any instability. He glanced at Mark, who smirked. By instability, you mean Clara. We can't have her suing for a bigger slice of the pie when she finally wakes up and realizes she's broke. Grace laughed, a sharp, brittle sound. Oh, please. Remember Thanksgiving? She showed up in that thrift store wrap talking about her kiln schedules like it was a board meeting. If we don't step in now, she'll drag the name down. The Miller girl just made partner at her firm, and our sister is finger-painting pots for a living. My knees buckled. I pressed against the wall, the vase clutched to my chest like a shield. They weren't just dismissing my work. They were erasing me. The relinquishment, that meant signing away any claim to the family trust, the one my father had promised would be divided into equal shares when we all turned 30. And the offshore transfer was a calculated theft, hiding assets right under my nose. I had suspected something was off for years, the way Dad dodged questions about estate planning, but this was a betrayal dressed as protection. Once she signs, we move fast, my father's voice dropped lower. Rosa clears the old room that night. The tools, the sketches, the wheels, all of it goes to storage or donation. No more half measures. She either commits to the firm, or she walks away with nothing. The room fell quiet, the sound of ice clinking in glasses signaling their agreement. Grace raised hers to fresh starts. Heat flooded my face, a roar building in my ears. $40 million. My inheritance was being funneled away because I chose clay over contracts. The vase slipped from my numb fingers, thudding softly against the rug. I caught it just in time, but the noise was enough. A chair scraped inside the room. Panic surged. I couldn't face them, not like this, not with the truth burning holes in my chest. Backing away, silent as a shadow, I turned and slipped down the hall, past the kitchen where Rosa was humming over the stove, oblivious. My bag was still by the front door. I grabbed it, eased the heavy oak entrance open, and stepped out into the cooling Texas night. The truck's engine turned over, the headlights cutting through the dusk as I eased down the long drive. No goodbyes, no explanations. Just the hum of tires on the blacktop carrying me back toward the city. The gift was still wrapped on the passenger seat, a peace offering for a family that had already declared war. The hum of tires on the I-35 was the only thing keeping me grounded as I fled back toward Austin. The wrapped vase sat on the passenger seat like a physical manifestation of a lie I could no longer sustain. I pulled over at a desolate rest stop somewhere past San Marcos, my hands shaking too violently to grip the wheel. The engine ticked as it cooled under a vast, indifferent Texas sky. I killed the headlights and finally let the tears come. Maya picked up on the second ring. Clara? It's 2 a.m. Where are you? I could barely find my voice. They're cutting me out. Publicly. New Year's Eve. Maya didn't waste time on empty comfort. Tell me exactly what you heard. I repeated every word, the relinquishment papers, the $40 million being moved offshore, the plan to turn my childhood bedroom into a gym. There was a long silence on her end. You still have the forensic files? She asked. 3 years ago, right after my father misplaced a folder of trust documents I needed for my taxes, I had hired a discreet accounting firm in San Antonio. They had been feeding me copies ever since, bank transfers, shell company ledgers, and every email between Mark and their strategist. 70% of the puzzle was already sitting in my safe. Maya's voice was steadying. You're an hour from the studio. Get home. We finish this now. I wiped my face, started the truck, and merged back onto the empty interstate. The warehouse district was hauntingly quiet when I rolled up the metal gate of my studio. I flipped on the industrial work lights, and the rows of shelves glowed. There were empty spots where my latest collection had shipped out to collectors weeks ago. A single kiln still radiated a faint, lingering warmth. The space smelled of damp earth and silica, it smelled like success, not the failure my family imagined. I kicked off my shoes and went straight to the office corner. The safe was tucked behind a stack of blank clay slabs. I dialed the combination, and the heavy door swung open. Inside were 3 thick expandable folders, 2 encrypted drives, and a printed timeline I had annotated in red ink. I spread the documents across the large table where I usually trimmed my work. The bank statements showed massive transfers starting 18 months ago, round numbers, always on Fridays, always routed through a series of entities in the Caribbean. I found a draft of the new trust amendment with my name crossed out in heavy black marker. I opened my laptop and pulled up my studio's actual numbers, the ones my family had never bothered to ask for. Last fiscal year, 870,000 gross. This year, on pace for 1.4 million. I had private commissions from collectors in London and Dubai, and a waiting list that included half the tech wives in Silicon Valley. It was all cash flow I had kept quiet because I didn't need their approval to validate my life. The clock on the wall read 3:12 a.m. I had 8 days until the party. 8 days to fill the last 30% of the gaps, tie every loose end, and package the truth in a way they would never forget. I brewed coffee strong enough to strip glaze and started making calls. Discreet ones. The forensic accountant answered immediately. He had been waiting for my signal. A tax attorney I had met at a gallery opening in Dallas owed me a favor. By sunrise, I had a week of appointments lined up and a high-end courier service booked for the 31st. I stood in the center of the studio as the first light of dawn crept through the high windows. The shelves might have looked empty to my parents, but every missing vase had paid for the evidence now scattered across my table. They wanted to prove I was broken. I was about to prove I was the only one in the family who knew how to build something that lasted. The decision settled in my chest like a perfectly centered piece of clay. No more hoping they would change. No more second-guessing my worth. They had drawn a line in the sand, and I was about to bury them in it. The next morning, I was sitting in a glass-walled office downtown. Elliot Grant wore a navy suit that looked like armor. He slid a legal pad across the table. "Show me what you've got." I dumped the folders and the drives in front of him. He spent an hour leafing through the pages, whistling low under his breath. "You weren't exaggerating, Clara. This is a federal case wrapped in a silk bow." We spent the next 4 hours cross-referencing every transfer. His paralegal pulled the final missing pieces, wire confirmations and the signed amendment page, from public filings before lunch. By 2 o'clock, the binder was 200 pages thick, tabbed, highlighted, and notarized in triplicate. 2 encrypted USB drives joined the package, 1 master, 1 backup. Elliot leaned back, his expression unreadable. "You're sure you want to deliver this on the 31st? 11:30 sharp." "Right before the countdown," I said. He didn't argue. My next stop was a custom wood shop in East Austin. The owner owed me for a large-scale installation I'd done for his showroom. I sketched the design on a piece of butcher paper, black walnut, blind dovetails, brass hinges. The Sterling family crest was to be laser-etched onto the lid. The interior would be lined in charcoal suede with a recessed compartment for the binder and a velvet tray for the drives. He promised it would be finished in 6 days, with a discreet, white-glove delivery scheduled for the night of the gala. I paid him in cash and left. Back at the studio, I opened the group chat I had kept alive since my university days. Maya, Leo, Sarah, and Elena, the only people who had never called my work a hobby. I typed, "I need the Canyon House in West Texas for New Year's Eve. 10 of us max money is no object." Maya replied within seconds, "Already booked it last month when you said you might bail." "You're welcome." Leo sent a champagne emoji. Sarah dropped the link to the villa. Elena just wrote, "We've got your back. Always." I booked private chefs, a mixologist, and a local band that played haunting, high desert rock under the stars. The villa featured a heated infinity pool overlooking the deep limestone canyons, with enough suites so that no one had to share. I paid the full amount up front, non-refundable. As night fell, the industrial lights of my studio buzzed overhead. I sat at the glazing table with a single sheet of heavy cream cardstock and my favorite fountain pen. I wrote slowly, every letter deliberate and sharp. Arthur, Eleanor, Mark, Grace. You spent a lifetime convincing me I would never be enough. Tonight, you will learn exactly what enough costs. The original documents are already in the hands of the federal authorities and the primary trust attorneys. What you are holding are merely copies. Happy New Year. This is the last you will ever hear from me. Clara. I blotted the ink, folded the page, and slid it into a matching envelope. I sealed it with crimson wax, pressing the sterling crest into the center, the same crest that had been etched into the lid of the box. I walked the studio floor one last time, running my fingers along the cool, quiet shelves. The kiln ticked softly as it cooled from the final test firing. Every tool was in its place, every surface was wiped clean. The studio had never looked more prepared. I set the envelope on top of the binder, closed the suede flap, and locked the walnut box that the woodworker had delivered that afternoon. It weighed exactly 11 pounds, heavy enough to feel like a gavel. For the first time in years, my hands were perfectly still. Each step of the process had landed exactly where it needed to. The clay was centered, the walls pulled high, the rim finished clean. All that remained was the fire. I turned off the lights, set the alarm, and walked out into the cool Texas night. 8 days felt like an eternity, yet it was exactly enough time. New Year's Eve arrived. Back at the estate on Ridgeview, the mansion glittered like a fever dream under a sky as black as ink. A procession of obsidian SUVs and white luxury sedans crawled up the long driveway, their headlights sweeping across the scrub oaks wrapped in thousands of tiny white lights. Valets in crisp uniforms moved with rhythmic precision between the idling cars. A deep crimson carpet unrolled from the motor court to the towering bronze doors, flanked by iron torches that hissed and flared in the winter air. Inside, the climate was controlled but the energy was volatile. A producer flown in from the coast stood on a mirrored platform, dropping a custom set that made the crystal chandeliers vibrate. 3 bars glowed like modern altars. One served only vintage champagne from oversized bottles, another offered rare whiskeys in hand-cut crystal. The third mixed cocktails that smoked with dry ice and pulsed with neon light. Women in liquid gold and midnight sequins moved across the acrylic floor laid over the infinity pool, their every step sending ripples of colored light beneath their heels. Eleanor moved through the crowd with the grace of a reigning monarch, her gold silk gown catching every strobe light, the diamonds at her throat scattering flashes like a barrage of paparazzi. She laughed with practiced ease, touching shoulders and repeating the same line to every guest. Our most significant gala yet. Everyone who truly matters is in this room tonight. Arthur stood beneath the massive wrought iron chandelier in the lounge, Cuban smoke curling around his head as he promised exclusive looks at new developments in the valley. Mark worked the room in a midnight blue tuxedo, his eyes constantly scanning for the next influential handshake. Grace posed on the grand staircase with her circle of influencers, her diamond choker flashing every time a ring light caught her reflection. A massive screen dominated the far wall above the double-sided fireplace, cycling through slow-motion drone footage of the Sterling holdings at sunset. The countdown clock beneath it read 11:27 p.m. when the front doors opened one last time. A courier in a tailored black suit and white gloves stepped inside. He carried a single object, a black walnut box with gleaming brass hinges, and the Sterling crest laser-etched into the center of the lid. Security recognized the pre-approved delivery code and waved him through without a second glance. He placed the box on the white marble console beneath an arrangement of exotic orchids, bowed once, and vanished back into the night. Eleanor spotted the box immediately. Her smile sharpened, taking on a predatory glint. "Oh, look everyone. Our little artist finally remembered us." She clapped her manicured hands, drawing the attention of the nearby guests. Clara sent a gift. Phones rose in a wave of glowing screens as she carried the box to the center of the room, her heels clicking against the limestone. She placed it on a central ottoman, as if she were unveiling a trophy of her own victory. Grace stepped forward and snatched the thick cream ribbon. "Probably another lopsided vase for the guest bath," she said, yanking the silk loose. The lid lifted with a soft, magnetic sigh. Inside, nestled in charcoal suede, lay a sealed cream envelope with a red wax seal, a 200-page black binder, and 2 matte black USB drives resting in velvet. Mark rolled his eyes, his voice thick with the arrogance of a man half-drunk on his own success. $10 says it's a sob story video, begging for a way back in. He grabbed one of the drives and shoved it into the media hub beneath the massive screen. The drone footage of the Sterling estates vanished instantly. The room lights dimmed automatically, primed for what the system assumed was a surprise presentation. Page 1 filled the wall in crisp 4K, a wire confirmation for an offshore account in the Caribbean. Page 2, an email thread titled "Finalize removal of CS before December 31st. Page 3, a trust amendment with Arthur and Mark's signatures in bold blue ink. Page 4, an IRS Form 211, a whistleblower acknowledgement, stamped as "Received." The music thundered for 3 more seconds before someone finally cut the power. Silence crashed down like a guillotine. Grace's scream ripped through the hush. "Oh my God. We're finished." Her champagne flute slipped from her fingers, exploding into 1,000 crystal shards across the travertine floor. She stared at the screen as if it were a physical threat. Eleanor took a single step back, her gold gown suddenly appearing too tight for her to breathe. Her knees buckled. 2 guests reached out, but they were too late. Her head hit the corner of the ottoman with a dull thud before she slumped to the floor. Arthur stood rooted to the spot, his face the color of bleached paper, his eyes locked on his own signature blown up 10 feet wide on the wall. A vein in his temple throbbed with such violence it looked ready to burst. He opened his mouth, but no sound emerged. The screen began to autocycle on a 30-second loop. Account numbers, transfer dates, the strategist's notes, and the final line, submitted to Internal Revenue Service, Criminal Investigation Division. A tech mogul in the back whispered to his wife. "That's felony territory." His wife already had her phone out, recording the loop. Mark lunged for the remote, tripped over Grace's discarded heels, and sent the device skittering across the floor. He scrambled after it on all fours while the evidence of their fraud continued to pulse above him. The guest stepped back, forming a perfect circle of judgment. Grace spun toward the nearest exit, only to find it blocked by a wall of tuxedos and sequins. Every phone in the room was pointed at her like a weapon. Her mascara began its descent in dark, jagged rivers. Eleanor came to on the floor, gasping and clutching at Arthur's ankle. He finally found his voice, raw and ragged. "Turn it off. For the love of God, turn it off." A staff member finally yanked the drive, but the damage was irreversible. The video had already been uploaded to dozens of private stories, and one very public, pre-timed link. The countdown clock hit 11 hours 59 minutes and 40 seconds. No one moved toward the terrace for the $40,000 fireworks display. The winter wind rattled the towering glass walls. 80 of the most powerful people in the state stood frozen, watching the Sterling Empire crack wide open in real time. 2 hours north, under a different sky, I lifted my glass to the moon and waited for the world to start burning. My phone began to explode at 11:57 p.m., exactly 3 minutes before the world flipped upside down for them. I was standing barefoot on the warm sandstone terrace of the Canyon Villa. The red rock cathedrals glowed a deep, bruised orange under the moon. The infinity pool shimmered with turquoise light, reflecting the fairy lights strung through the mesquite trees. Our private chef had just served the final course, caviar and gold leaf chocolate, and the mixologist was pouring vintage champagne into coupe glasses that caught the light like prisms. Grace's name flashed first. Her contact photo was an old one, showing her laughing on a yacht 5 years ago. I let it ring until it died. Mark's followed 30 seconds later. Same fate. Eleanor's call came next, her face frozen in a Botox-smooth smile from a charity ball. I watched the screen pulse against the teak table and did nothing. Arthur's name appeared last. No photo. Just the word Dad in all caps. I swiped to accept, tapped the speaker icon, and held the phone high. Southwest. Everyone on the terrace could hear. Maya, Leo, Sarah, and the rest of our small, chosen family formed a loose semicircle behind me. Champagne flutes paused halfway to lips. The roar that erupted from the speaker was so violent it nearly distorted the hardware. Clara, you wretched, ungrateful little. Arthur used words I had never heard him utter, his voice a jagged edge of pure rage. The terrace went dead quiet, save for the faint, rhythmic thump of the band inside warming up for the final countdown. Someone behind me let out a single, sharp bark of a laugh that echoed off the canyon walls. Then Eleanor's voice shoved its way in, high-pitched and cracking with desperation. Baby, Clara, please. Please pick up. Come home. We can tell them it was a hoax. We can fix this. You're still our daughter. Grace's voice shrieked over her, raw and animalistic. You jealous, talentless bitch. You just destroyed everything we spent our lives building. Mark tried the measured approach, though his voice shook with a barely contained panic. Every top-tier firm in the state is already drafting cease and desist orders, Clara. You'll be in a federal cell by spring. Arthur spoke again, his tone turning cold, the businessman emerging to attempt a final bargain. Name your number. 10 million. 20? Whatever it takes to make this disappear. I waited until the chaos on the other end ran out of oxygen. The wind off the canyon carried the scent of juniper and the sharp, cold taste of freedom. I brought the phone closer to my mouth and spoke with a slow, arctic clarity. Listen to me, because this is the last time any of you will ever hear my voice. The moment that box was opened, the Sterling family died. Not wounded, not sleeping, dead and buried. I kept every transfer record, every email, every forged page. The authorities have the originals, your partners have the copies. There is no negotiation table. There is no fix. There is no more daughter, no more sister, and no more safety net. You are strangers now. And strangers don't get second chances. Eleanor wailed something incoherent about grandchildren she would never meet. Grace shrieked that I would burn. Mark threatened to leak my studio's private finances, as if I had anything left to hide from the world. Arthur tried one last time, his voice cracking. You'll regret this for the rest of your life. I smiled at the moon. No, Father. You will. I ended the call. The screen went black. I powered the phone completely off, pried out the SIM card with my thumbnail, and flicked it into the infinity pool. It vanished with a tiny plink, swallowed by the turquoise light. Maya handed me a fresh flute, her eyes shining with fierce pride. The band leader began the count from inside the glass doors. 10. 9. 8. We shouted the numbers together, our voices bouncing off the ancient limestone of the canyon. At 3, our private pyrotechnics team ignited the first shells. At 1, the sky detonated in waterfalls of gold, violet chrysanthemums, and crimson hearts that bloomed and dripped like slow fire. The canyon walls turned molten red, then gold, then brilliant white. Leo threw both arms around my shoulders, yelling something joyous I couldn't hear over the thunder of the display. Sarah jumped into the pool fully dressed, her sequins flashing like fish scales beneath the water. I raised my glass to the explosions overhead and drank until the bubbles burned my throat. The champagne tasted like victory, like oxygen, like the first day of a life that finally belonged to me. Much later, when the fires in the outdoor pits had burned low and the others had drifted inside to crash on the oversized sectionals, I stayed on the terrace alone. The canyons were silent again, ancient and unmoved. I leaned against the stone railing and spoke into the dark, soft enough that only the desert could hear. Happy New Year, Sterlings. Enjoy the consequences. For months later, the first certified letter from the IRS landed on the marble console in the foyer of the Ridgeview estate. The return address was cold and official: Department of the Treasury, Large Business and International Division. Arthur signed for it with a hand that wouldn't stop trembling. Inside was a notice of deficiency for unreported offshore income totaling $40 million. The assessment included a 75% fraud penalty plus compounded interest. The grand total due, $34,600,000. The payment deadline was 90 days. 2 weeks after the gala, the Singapore investment group cancelled the joint venture for the new coastal resort. The email was a single, devastating sentence: "In light of recent regulatory concerns, we are withdrawing our letter of intent." A Dallas-based conglomerate followed 48 hours later, citing reputational risk. 2 flagship projects and $400 million in projected revenue vanished overnight. Mark lasted exactly 9 more days as CFO. The board convened an emergency session and voted him out unanimously. Security escorted him from the building with a single cardboard box and his framed Ivy League diploma. His professional profiles remained frozen for months, labeled with a desperate, open-to-work badge that no one clicked. Grace's husband filed for divorce that same month. His attorney attached the offshore trust documents to the petition, claiming half of the hidden assets as marital property. A judge froze every account with her name on it pending a full forensic audit. Her country club memberships lapsed. Her luxury SUV was repossessed in the club's parking lot while she was inside having lunch with women who suddenly found it impossible to catch her eye. Eleanor's social calendar became a graveyard. The chairs of the annual charity balls quietly scrubbed her name from the invitation committees. The Contemporary Art Museum accepted her resignation without a word of protest. Her text threads went silent. The only notifications she received were the repetitive pings of people leaving the group chats. Her daily tennis foursome dissolved without a single explanatory phone call. Then came the summons from grandmother Martha. At 91, she sat ramrod straight in her leather wingback chair at her ranch in the Panhandle. She slid the revised estate documents across the heavy oak table. Arthur, Eleanor, Mark and Grace were now listed under a single, chilling line, intentionally omitted. Everything, the ranch, the commercial holdings, the family foundation, was rerouted to distant cousins and a trio of wildlife sanctuaries. Martha's parting words were as sharp as a winter frost. "You tried to steal from your own blood. And blood remembers." The Ridgeview estate went on the market 6 weeks later. The listing photos showed the same marble foyer and the same infinity pool, but the price was slashed 20% below market value. Buyers circled like vultures, lowballing the offer because everyone in the state knew the story. Arthur aged a decade in 4 months, the silver at his temples turned a stark, brittle white. Eleanor began taking Valium with her lunch. Mark moved into a modest 2-bedroom condo near the airport and stopped answering the door. Grace flew to a wellness retreat in Tulum and simply never returned. The sterling name disappeared from the construction cranes. The old signs came down, and new letterheads were printed without the family crest. The empire didn't collapse in a single explosion, it bled out slowly, publicly, and painfully. And through it all, the hills of West Texas stayed silent. By the end of the summer, I was on a one-way flight to Denver with 6 crates of greenware in the cargo hold. The scandal had done what years of quiet grinding never could: it put my name in rooms I never could have paid to enter. A small show I'd done in an Austin warehouse the previous winter, 12 pieces, invite only, suddenly resurfaced on every major art blog from London to Seoul. Headlines that once read, "Sterling heiress exposes family fraud," now carried subheaders like, "And she is one of the most provocative ceramicists working today." 3 weeks after the story broke, an email arrived from Elena Rossi, the director of Gallery Apex in the Rhino district. The subject line read, "We would be honored." She flew to Austin the next day, walked through my dusty studio in 5-inch heels without flinching, and offered me an exclusive 3-year contract on the spot. The lease on a 3,000 square foot raw loft in Denver was covered. 2 industrial gas kilns, a state-of-the-art slab roller, and a ventilation system I could never have afforded were already installed when I touched down. I moved in September. The mountains glittered outside my floor-to-ceiling windows every morning, while I threw the first new forms of my life without the weight of a last name I hated. Collectors who once ghosted my inquiries now begged for spots on a 2-year waiting list. Museums requested loans for their permanent collections. My prices tripled, then tripled again. It didn't feel like revenge. It simply felt like gravity finally working in my favor. One gray November afternoon, a certified envelope arrived at the gallery desk. The return address belonged to a law firm in the Hill Country. The sender was Arthur Sterling. I recognized the handwriting on the front, still perfect, still arrogant. I didn't open it. I walked to the post office on the corner, wrote refused, returned to sender in thick black marker across the seal, and dropped it back into the system. That was the last time any of them would ever reach me. Winter came early to the Rockies. On the first real snow day, I loaded the new 45-foot kiln for its inaugural firing. There were 40 pieces, tall vessels with cracked, glacial glazes, massive platters in iron red and ash white, bowls so thin they rang like bells when tapped. I set the program, closed the heavy steel door, and pressed start. The elements began to glow orange through the peephole. Outside, the snow muffled the city to a hush. Inside, the kiln roared like a quiet, contained dragon. I poured a mug of coffee, walked to the window, and watched the flakes drift over the city. My phone sat on the sill, the screen black as it had been for weeks. I picked it up, held the power button until the logo appeared one last time, and then let the battery die completely. No ceremony. No speech. Just the soft click of a chapter closing forever. The kiln climbed past 2,000 degrees. I thought about every person who had told me I was wasting my life in the mud. I thought about the little girl who used to hide in the pottery shed behind the mansion because it was the only place no one followed her. I thought about the woman standing here now, studio paid for, shows sold out through 2028, my name on waiting lists instead of disinheritance clauses. I finally understood the only truth that matters. You don't need a seat at their table when you've learned how to build your own. You don't need their approval when your work speaks louder than their money ever could. You don't need their love when you finally learn how to give it to yourself. The kiln beeped. Cycle complete. I opened the door hours later to reveal perfect shelves of fire-kissed clay, stronger, harder, and more beautiful than anything they had ever touched. I smiled at the glow and whispered to the empty room. This is what happens when you stop asking to be let in, and start burning the door down. That was the day Clara Sterling disappeared for good. And Clara, just Clara, began.